Hello, welcome to the 20th episode of Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This episode is about The Conjuring from 2013 and The Conjuring 2 from 2016, both films. And we just want to prepare you. Our next episode is going to be about The Babadook from 2014. And that episode, we are going to have a guest, Andrew Sheets, a.k.a. Meredith, who is a drag performer and promoter for the party Stereo Argento, which I'm very excited to go to finally this June 30th at the Stud. But Meredith can promote it her own damn self next week when she's on.
Yeah, I mean, and also if you happen to not listen to the next podcast and you listen to this one, it is a Dario Argento themed horror drag night, which based on our audience seems pretty much perfect for you guys.
It's kind of like the way I live my life, but like it's at a club and other people will be there.
None of my Southern cronies have yet to step up and represent themselves in our audience with interesting art stuff. Although I guess the popcorn, piss, and vinegar guys count.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I have nothing to plug, but we should certainly plug our own damn podcast.
Yeah. So please go over to iTunes, 5-star ratings, leave your pithy reviews. We've gotten a lot of nice reviews lately, so thank you guys very much. It actually makes me feel really great on my long-ass commute to work into the belly of darkness, also known as Silicon Valley, when I open up the iTunes podcast app and see a new review. It's pretty cool.
And we now have a newsletter. We send out an email newsletter with every episode, and I recommend you sign up and join the newsletter at scarythoughts.org. It's a very easy, 3 fields of text that you can join with.
Yeah, we each pick a few things that we happen to be enjoying during that time period or whatever. It'll often be some sort of film or podcast channel or...
It's like the Maria Popova of Sorrows.
Yeah. I mean, I often promote the latest in survival weaponry or athletic tools to make you more deadly. So if that's your thing, that's a good thing to look at.
And I can help you tap into the most maudlin music that humanity has to offer.
Yeah.
For this episode, as with all Scary Thoughts episodes, spoiler alert, whole episode, we're not reviewing these films. We're just talking about them as we've seen them, and you should see them before joining us for sure. And this episode is about The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, the Enfield Poltergeist. But we're also going to be touching on the sort of bigger world that James Wan, as a producer and director and writer, has built around specifically Ed and Lorraine Warren. We'll get more into them later. But there's sort of, if you draw a line between the real-life Warrens and all the movies that are spilling out of The Conjuring, it'll include Annabelle, The Haunted from 1991, even the Amityville Horror going back that far. Haunting in Connecticut, Poltergeist is sort of connected. And upcoming are The Nun, Annabelle 2, and The Conjuring 3.
Yep.
So this is a pretty big franchise, actually.
Yep. Yeah, and I think... looking back on it, I did an episode about Poltergeist with the Popcorn, Piss, and Vinegar guys. And at the time, we were talking about like how original and cool the movie was. But when you walk back even further, I'm sure you could walk inspiration all the way back to some sort of cave person making horrific images on a cave wall, with horror. But so much of what we think of as the modern elements of a haunted house story really depend on the Warrens and their mythos.
Absolutely. Yeah. They were definitely like right place, right time. And these movies in particular, they're very samey to each other. They're very similar to Amityville Horror and almost every damn haunted house film or story you could probably ever come across. However, I have a question for you right off the top.
Yep.
What is the plot of The Conjuring? This is not just a question. This is almost a challenge because I've seen The Conjuring, I think, 3 times, and I probably couldn't tell you the plot.
I mean, you want me to walk it out right now?
Like, even 2 to 3 sentences.
Sure.
Like without saying, like, it's about a haunted house and there's a demon. No, what's the plot?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because it wraps up into the actual events. And I'm thinking about, like, as I'm about to describe this, I've listened to so many interviews with the actual family involved and all these other people who were there, like the camera crew guy that was there. Like basically everybody associated with these stories has their own little. There's like a little cottage industry around these hauntings of people who just like do books, tours, lectures. You know, you have a room full of haunted shit that you can look at in Connecticut for like $170 a ticket. If we lived closer, I would be totally down for it.
Yeah.
But, you know, like real quick, it's every haunted house movie you've ever seen, you know, and I think that's one of the things that's so challenging about what you're asking. But, you know, the Perron family, they go to live in this large farmhouse, and it's fucking enormous. It's like the Fight Club house. It's huge, and it's run down. It's old. It's from the 1800s. Spooky shit starts to happen, and it's unexplainable. You know, things are getting moved around. People are getting bitten, thrown. The mom goes to see a lecture by the Warrens, which is never explained in the film. Like, why is she there? Like, it's a college. I mean, I
figured she sought them out.
Yeah, you think that, but then like they never, like that makes total sense. But they never. There's no exposition of that. Like, oh, maybe this is a haunting. Like you would maybe discuss it with your husband before you go. Yep. Which is in real life. The Warrens and their crew showed up basically unannounced with like a huge crew in tow.
Well, same with The Conjuring 2. Same with the Enfield Poltergeist. The Warrens just kind of like showed up for a couple of days unannounced and then pissed off. It didn't help shit.
Yeah, well, the father was super furious. You know, you get the feeling that he was like a very angry man just in general. And the actor Ron Livingston plays him more of like a melancholy sort of. There's this Hollywood thing where it's like, you know, like the right wing guys say it's like a conspiracy to make dads look bad on film, like, and I don't know that it's a conspiracy, but there is a trope of the failed dad in horror movies. You know, whether it be Poltergeist 1, the remake. You know, there's like the loser dad, and so he's a truck driver, and so he's coming in and out of town, and as he leaves, the house goes haywire, and there's like 5 daughters or something like that, and eventually the Warrens come first to do an investigation because that's kind of their job, is that they're demonologists, and the job of demonologist isn't to chase out the creatures, it's to just determine whether or not it's real so that the church can send in a priest. And that's basically what this is about. But then the church doesn't come, and they're forced to do their own exorcism, and then things go haywire. That's the plot, man. And it's easy to get mixed up in it because it's like barely a deal in the movie.
Totally. It's almost slightly incidental. I think that what I think is actually key to the plot that is not easy to remember is like, okay, the house is haunted. How? Why? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, there was that tree, and there was a hanging, and there was a witch and a demon, and the cursed land, and some people committed suicide, and like it's just kind of just half of occult and evil mythology out of the Catholic Church. Just kind of, it's all in there somewhere. It's just like emptying the kitchen drawer out on the table of what can go wrong in American history. Via the occult, and it's really kind of muddled. I mean, if you watch it, it's explained, but it's so hodgepodgey relative to any sort of possible reality. I mean, it's a little bit like watching a superhero film where you're like, why are they fighting? Who are these villains?
Yeah.
And what's their bone? What bone are they picking with Metropolis?
Yeah. And it definitely feels like the ideas of the spectacle on the screen drive this movie. So like and that's really where this movie shines, is a lot of the horror elements and like I don't want to say gags, but like the things that happen are great. They're just so well done. And the movement and the camera, especially in The Conjuring 2.
Yeah, the cinematography in Conjuring 2 is
it's really very solid. Good.
Yep.
And it gives you a sense of the place. Whenever the action happens or people are getting thrown around or like dropping through floors and stuff like that, you sort of never really lose where you are in the house, and it makes you connect with the characters in a way where like when you're like on the other side of a door, you really get what it feels like and what's on the other side of the door. And so when you go through and it's not as it was when they were just there, Like
it's almost the opposite of like The Shining, which the architecture of the Outlook Hotel, according to The Shining, is so disjointed, right? Like the architecture is in fact not possible. Hallways turn out where there should be a window, and you see the kid riding his big wheel down a hallway, and he's turning around corners that, if you map it out, aren't possible in 3 dimensions,
Right.
And that creates a disorientation. If you're somehow able to unconsciously follow the trajectories of the characters in the Outlook Hotel, it creates a disorientation because they're not in real space. It's discontinuous. Whereas in The Conjuring 2, you have such a sense of space that it gives you an intimacy with what's going on. And so when it's disrupted by evil forces, it's almost like you feel close to this space and maybe even feel protective of it if you're also connected to the characters.
Yeah.
Which I wasn't, but
Well, see,
that could happen.
It's interesting. I felt like a pretty strong connection to a lot of, not like the 100 kids, like, because there's just too many of them to really care about any of them.
Yeah. How many kids?
5. Yeah. I mean,
too many.
Yeah, it's like way too many. Roman Catholic,
Right.
Actually, that family's not. The Perron family is not religious. And the kids in the Enfield Case, the sequel, they're also not religious. And that is a bit of a tension in the film, because the church doesn't want to act on behalf of a non-Roman Catholic family.
Yeah.
Why would they? But the other part of it too is there's a bit of that fear from the witch, where what happens if you were taken into hell by a creature and you're unbaptized? It's extra scary, because
See, this is why Mormons are cool, because they just want everybody to go to heaven. Like, you can be like a pagan who died 500 years ago, and they're still like working on your souls. Whereas the Catholic Church, if you're, according to this movie, if you're like, please help us, they're like, nah,
Yeah,
you're on your own.
Well, Mormons, like, they even have like a retroactive baptism.
Yeah,
where a person
no, that's what I mean.
Yeah, which seems fairly progressive.
I don't know, man. It's pretty fucked up.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, why not? I was actually just having a conversation about this at a wedding the other day. Like, what would happen if you worshipped some other gods? Like, for instance, you worshipped Odin and you had died in battle and you're in Valhalla, and you're like, just every day you're going to battle, hall full of meat in the evening, bone and Valkyries, just having a great old time. And then some plucky young Mormon decides to baptize you into the faith, and you get sucked out of Valhalla, and you end up in the weird Mormon mansions in the sky. Like,
I hope that's a subplot in American Gods.
It should be.
Yeah.
It definitely should be. And I want my check if it happens, for sure.
So I'm glad you brought up The Witch, because I feel like there's so much to talk about, I think, about witches and witchcraft, and maybe we'll get to that later. But I think that Charles Mackay wrote a book called Witch, A Tale of Terror, which Sam Harris actually just did the narration of the audio. Like, if you listen to it on Audible, it's Sam Harris actually doing the voiceover. And it's kind of a historical account of all the terrible things that witches were accused of and how they were punished. And it's epic and totally bananas. And it's actually a lot of overlap with what the Warrens, and even just in these films, accuse demons and witches of doing. It's like this, again, it's this like laundry list of evils that are committed in the name of Satan or demons or against God. And, well, they're not exactly the same, but it's kind of the same old shit, right? And I think it's just really funny that, I mean, we even use expressions like witch trial to denote that something is patently false and blown out of proportion. Yet the Warrens are like, yeah, there was this witch and she sacrificed her newborn child to a demon, and now, this is why. And like, I don't know. I mean, I have so much positive to say about this movie. However, right up front, I kind of have to say, like, okay, so a witch sacrificed her child to the devil, and that's why all this is happening? Yeah, fuck you. Witches caused this. The witches of Salem are why this family, like, that is just such preposterous nonsense to claim as being a true story, which, I mean, we need to dismantle what calling a movie a true story is about.
That's exactly where I wanted to go next.
Yeah. These movies have this based on a true story tagline. Let's let's take that apart. Like, what does that mean? Because that's it's a trope. It's part of horror cinema history that is applied to things that have zero basis in fact, like we discussed in our Return of the Living Dead episode, is parodied. Because, there's basically an apocalypse at the end of that movie, which didn't happen. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is totally based on Ed Gein, but, it's so not factually connected to what happens in Chainsaw.
Yeah.
And then there's this movie, and it's like, well, the Warrens were real people, but how much of these movies are we supposed to take as real? Is that just about making it scarier because it's real, or is actually believed? Are we supposed to actually believe in and put our in this artwork? Are we supposed to put our trust in this real life couple who's only half dead now?
Yeah, well, I mean, it does a few things. First, audiences are when you have in Burbank or whatever, we have 12 people watch a movie and tell if it sucks or not. People will often find a movie just naturally scarier if they know if it's based on a true film or a true story rather. And so there's that going on. Then there's just the tradition in horror where it's like, it's based on a true story. It's just kind of a thing to do, like spelling the with two E's. It's just an affectation.
Right.
But then it also does legal work, which is if it's based on a true story, that means all elements that happen to the characters that are portrayed that they have the rights for are alive. So this movie, they can't do Amityville Horror as a film because another studio owns the rights. But as long as this is based on a true story, they can reference the Amityville Horror because it happened to the Warrens in their lives. So there's a little bit of that going on too.
Yeah. Well, I think this all comes to a deeper question currently because there is a lawsuit happening around these properties, these intellectual properties, where the writer, Gerald Brittle, who wrote a book in 1980 called The Demonologist. And Gerald Brittle basically wrote a book, The Demonologist, about Ed and Lorraine Warren, the couple in these films. And at the time, he believed in them. He believed that he was a demonologist and she was a medium. And he had them sign a contract that their life story was basically his intellectual property. They would need his permission to make money off of whatever happens to them. And nobody got his permission for the Conjurings and Annabelle, etc. And so there's a lawsuit going on. Actually, if I may quote The Hollywood Reporter, which is where I get all my fake news, quote, Gerald Brittle says the horror movies infringe on his 1980 book, The Demonologist, which tells the stories of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. But they claimed the films weren't based on The Demonologist, but instead on, quote, historical facts. It's a common argument raised during copyright dust-ups involving true-life tales. Here, though, Brittle's legal team says it has an ace in the hole. The Demonologist isn't historical fact because the Warrens lied about what happened in their stories. Henry writes, this is a pattern of deceit that is part of a scheme that the Warrens have perpetuated for years. Brittle's lawyer wrote, there are no historical facts of a witch ever existing at the Perrin farmhouse, a witch hanging herself, possession, satanic worship, or child sacrifice. And so, end quote. And what's interesting to me about this lawsuit is that what it's based around are not historical facts, but that the author believed them to be historical facts at the time. And now the film studio has to prove that this is history and that's why they have a right to it. So they have to prove that the paranormal exists in order to win their lawsuit, which is...
good luck.
Totally. And could you imagine if they won? That would kind of almost change everything. I mean, I sort of feel like foundational Christian beliefs have such a foothold in our legal system that you don't have to really argue for them. In fact, time has just sort of been chipping away at the way in which Christianity is built into the American legal system. But this is almost can we back up? Can we go back to when the Catholic Church cast out demons and call it fact? That's amazing. I'm not into it, but it's super fascinating.
Well, it also kind of parallels a little bit of like how the Catholic Church even deals with the existence of demons and exorcisms and things like that, which is like, according to the book, according to the catechism, all of this stuff is real.
Yeah.
You know, like there are demons, there are spirits, like all this like supernatural taxonomy, it's like all walked out. But the church itself, it doesn't like to talk about it or really like to interact with it very much. Like, I don't know how much, you know, exorcism material you've delved into in your life, but I've read quite a few books by people who were exorcists, different fathers and stuff like that. And they all have this really weird, tinny outsider tone. Like, you can tell that they're basically like the fifth wheel of the Catholic Church. Like, it's not a thing that's like really supported by the mainstream church at all, but there's still exorcisms that happen. You know, there's a mechanism of exploring exorcisms or demon possession, and mostly what it does is it proves that the person is not actually possessed. Like, so like most of the infrastructure of the exorcism teams, they're basically skeptics. They're very high level skeptics. It's very rare that, except for in like third world countries where shit's just super popular to like go nuts, it's very rare in a first world country for an exorcism to be performed, you know, and the church is very good at debunking stuff, which is interesting because that's kind of Ed and Lorraine's job, specifically Ed's job, is he's one of 7 demonologists in North America who's not exactly licensed by, but, you know, he's a member of the church and it's a service that he provides. So they're supposed to go in and do like the Christopher Hitchens job, you know, the Occam's razor thing, but they don't do that, or at least their characters in the film don't do that. Like, they walk in, they're like, "You heard knocks, huh? 3 of them?" They're like, "Yeah." "Oh, that makes sense. You know, 3 knocks is a mimicry of the Trinity." You know, like all that stuff. It seems like they go from they want to believe the person immediately, rather than not believe them. It's like they're going to accept the story, which is weird.
It seems that the legacy of a lot of Christianity and the Catholic Church, as we're just talking about with witches in early American history, Christianity is laden with firm belief in these things, that it being rarer and rarer for the church to get in these conflicts, I think has to do with, and I mean, you brought up Christopher Hitchens, has to do with the work of the secular world debunking this stuff, not debunking ghosts and demonologists, but debunking the most nonsensical aspects of the Bible and really holding up a mirror to a lot of beliefs in it. And I mean, I don't want this podcast episode to go fully into skeptic land, but it is, again, this sort of backpedaling that I think is really interesting about the Warrens, is they're sort of taking Catholicism and running it backwards instead of into our contemporary time, when, thank God, the Catholic Church is ashamed probably of how much havoc it's caused in the name of exorcisms and casting out demons and purging witches and the like, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, the other thing about exorcisms that people don't often know is it's not typically a one and done sort of thing, right? Like, you don't go in, cast the demon out, everything's cool afterwards, like in the films. It often involves like repeat visits, like almost having a psychologist, or the priest would almost come in and like kind of work with the person. So the tradition of exorcism reminds me a little bit of the tradition of alchemy. So from alchemy and all of its nonsense, you end up with chemistry eventually. From exorcisms and all of its nonsense, you end up with weird psychology, you know, dealing with like extreme cases of, you know, because people really do get super strong and crazy and speak in different voices and things like that. Like that is for sure something that happens. It's probably, is it demons? Probably not. It's just probably just what happens when your body gets an adrenaline dump and you go fucking hard. So, you know, like for 1,000 years, you get an exorcist and now you get electroshock therapy or whatever.
Right. Well, I find that you saying that it's not one and done exorcisms is of course, another way to maintain power, that where there's maintenance, there's a maintenance of power.
Just like a fucking chiropractor.
Don't get me started on chiropractics. Similar with psychology, there's no one and done. It's about maintenance. Similar with pharmacology, there's no pill that will solve your problem, generally speaking. And partly this is about, well, problems are hard to solve. There's one and done solutions to problems other than pulling your teeth out to get rid of a toothache. It's rarely so simple. But when it comes down to something like an exorcism not being an easy solution, like, well, of course, the longer the Catholic Church is meddling in your life, the longer you're dependent on them.
Yeah. I mean, personally, man, I would love to see evidence of the supernatural. But it's interesting theologically, though, like if you know there's a demon, then it sort of backs up the rest of theology of the church. And you're like, well, I guess I'll be going to church on Sundays then. Like, sign me up for Mass, you know, if this is true. It's interesting, too, though, like in the 70s, the popularity in this genre really kicked off with William Blatty's The Exorcist, and especially when the film came out. You know, the church went from no one really ever investigated exorcisms to every time some kid foamed at the mouth, they called a priest. You know, that was like all through the late 70s, early 80s. And then it kicks off the Satanic Panic and all this stuff.
I think going just before that is like Rosemary's Baby in 68, and Amityville Horror was 79. So that was even though you're talking about exorcism, but there is this lineage where I feel like there has always been a place for Ed and Lorraine Warren because at least American history has had these moral panics running through the decades. It's always something. And whether it's satanic ritual abuse or your kid is possessed and I mean, I'm about to make a sort of like conceptual jump, but I feel that despite my really liking this movie, I object to it on a lot of levels, and the truth of it is a bit of an issue for me. I enjoy the history of the horror film being, quote, based on a true story and the absurdity of that and the way it makes it scarier somehow. But somehow with this film, because it's based on this real-life couple, one of whom is still alive, and we're in this era where there are all these ghost hunter shows, and they're very much like reality TV, and it's sort of like the worst that pop culture has to offer. I don't think it's that big a jump to talk about fake news and Trump colluding with Russia and Pizzagate and these other sort of jumps in rational thinking that we're in the midst of. I sort of feel like we're in this moment where I desperately want people to think rationally and critically, and we're seeing a lot of the opposite. And even in my pop culture, I don't want it infected by these irrational jumps of manipulation and debunked nonsense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is almost like a pure version of what you're talking about, which is like people believe this even with complete absence of evidence. Yeah. And then the reason why they believe in it is where there's a vacuum of evidence, there's a surplus of storytelling. And everyone involved in these events are at heart storytellers, you know, and they're being compensated in various ways for the stories. You know, there's a lot of conversation around how Ed and Lorraine never took any money for their services. Like they would go in, exercise your house, you know, kick the demons out, and they wouldn't take a penny from you. But that's not really where the money was to be made. You know, the money was to be made in the story afterwards. And that's the same as like basically any time you have a person who's in deep with a narrative and is performing it to a group of people that they need to control for whatever reason, you're going to find that similar dynamic. I mean, like Ed and Lorraine Warren talking about hauntings, offering us, you know, they're introducing a problem, the exorcism, here's this, you know, you're haunted, that's the problem, here's the solution, is the exorcism. That's just basic salesmanship, and that exists in everything. Yes. You know, like you see it even in, you know, like, oh, the problem's capitalism, here's warmed over Marxism, kids. Like it's like, and then you have like all these people who are like telling that story. Like, so they're going to be telling that story.
Well, I would draw a little connection to something like let's say the Grateful Dead. Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, like they would let you tape all their concerts straight off the board, and there's all this tape trading, and so nobody listens to their albums, everybody just listens to their live shows, and it's this big free-for-all, and you know, they don't want the money. It's like, they are the richest fucking musicians on planet Earth. just because they didn't take money in one way doesn't mean they weren't making money in other ways.
Yeah.
And so with Ed and Lorraine Warren, just because they weren't charging people in the most basic, most obvious way possible doesn't mean they weren't making money off of tours and lectures and books.
Yeah, I mean, I was really reminded of, I live in Oakland, where Jack LaLanne kind of started off his whole career, the public side of his career.
Yeah.
And the thing he did in the very beginning was he went to this school and found the skinniest kid and the fattest kid. And he's like, do you guys want to work out with me for like a year and see what happens? And they're like, great. And so he doesn't charge them. He gets them both super swole. And that's his career. Like, okay, I took the fat kid and the skinny kid. Now they're both shredded. Like, that was free. Now here, buy my book.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know. It's, I know that you have like a particular problem with Ed and Lorraine Warren, the actual real Ed and Lorraine Warren, because of like predatory
Thank
feeling.
you. No, predatory is a good word.
Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like if you indict them for selling a story, you have to also indict everyone else who's telling a story. And that goes for like fucking mindfulness coaches who think you can meditate your way out of hatred for your fucking day job, or yogis that think you're going to like fuck your way through Bali and find yourself with some Chardonnay and a surfer guy. I mean, like all of those.
Oh, that sounds awesome, though.
Yeah, those things but like at root, like they're just telling a story and cashing a check from people like buying into the story, and I think that happens. And I don't mean to excuse any of their negative actions, but I think this just seems to be a pretty widespread phenomenon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess it's also a matter of proportion with them. Your fortune teller on the corner who's just sort of just actually a failed therapist in one indirect way or another. And I don't want to discount occult practices or people who have some sort of extra sense. I'm not a pure skeptic here. I just sort of look at Ed and Lorraine Warren, who wrote a book, a factual book about a werewolf terrorizing London, that this actually happened and they were part of the solution.
We had talked about that off mic, and I said, what the hell? Like, where do you mix in a werewolf? It's like in True Blood territory.
It's exactly like True Blood territory.
But I looked into that book, and basically the person is not literally a werewolf. It's a demon-possessed person who's manifesting werewolf-like morphology, I guess, is the thing, which is kind of a bit of a stretch, but it's not exactly.
That's just softballing it. That's just sort of True Blood light or something like that.
Yeah. I am really interested to see what the Faculty of Horror is cooking up around this whole like demonology werewolf sort of thing, because I noticed one of them on Instagram the other day. It showed just a picture of her research books, and there's like a werewolf book, an English magic book, and a few other things. I'm like, oh, let's see what's going on with these folks. I can't wait to see what their take on it is.
I think another beef with the Warrens that I have is actually in the movies, which is that Ed Warren is portrayed as like, in the first movie, he fixes the guy's car while he's out of town working. And then in the second movie, he's in the basement fixing the plumbing, fixing the washing machine.
Yes.
Which, two things. One, if you read accounts of what he was like, he was not a generous person. And in fact, again, Enfield Poltergeist, they breezed in unannounced and left after a few days. They were useless and certainly didn't try to help the family in any way. And second of all, their relationship, on one hand, it's sort of endearing. It's a bit of a love story. Like, they care about each other so deeply, and they're, these like long shots of them like holding each other and being so mindful of one another. And if you kind of back up and just look at their relationship as depicted, their relationship and their personalities as depicted in these movies, it's totally insipid and overblown.
Oh, I love it.
Zero flaws. Like, everything they do is totally selfless. To me, it's like, speaking of debunked, it's sort of a Mother Teresa thing. Like these pure souls who actually in real life are nothing of the sort.
It's just like Forrest and Jenny. Just love.
I thought we were done with that fucking movie.
We'll never be done with it.
Lordy.
I'm really glad that you brought up the idea of their relationship, you know, because I think it's helpful to distinguish between Ed and Lorraine Warren real life versus Ed and Lorraine Warren Conjuring characters.
Yeah.
You know, and we'll just start with the real life. It's like I noticed that most of the negative comments about them, the thing is the most acidic, is written by people who stand to make money if they are debunked, or like there's a whole bunch of people who are like kind of like side characters in these stories who they don't really have access to the money from the story itself, but they get secondary access by writing a thing about how shitty they are.
Sure.
And then most of the people who actually knew Ed and Lorraine seem to have a lot of affection for them. So like, you know, like for instance, the film crew, like the guys who wrote the script, they love her. Like they think she's great. These twins, Chad and Carrie Hayes, like really interesting guys, and they were like double mint twin kids when they were young, and one of them was in the movie Rad, the BMX movie. Yeah, totally cool, right? But they wrote The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, and they're friends with Lorraine. Like they adore her. And then there's all these really weird interviews where James Wan, the director of the film, and Lorraine are together, you know, and most of the people involved in the film seem to have or the two films rather, seem to have a real strong affection for the Warrens, which I thought was kind of interesting because when you pitch doing the show, you're like, these fucking cockheads, let's tear them apart. I mean, I don't think you didn't actually say that, but something very close to that. But you know, it seems like even within the world of skepticism, like of course skeptics are going to be like, look, these people who believe in this nonsense are idiots and they're taking people for a ride or whatever. But it seems even within the genre of people who take people for rides, most people who had interactions with them seem to think that they were pretty good. And Lorraine thinks that they really got that Patrick Wilson really got Ed right. Like that's, you know, and of course, like, you know, he's portrayed as this like white knight hero and she wants to remember her husband like that. But I mean, the characters in the film, Ed and Lorraine Warren, I love them. Like, I mean, you never see happily married people as heroes in a film. Like it's just never like a strong relationship, and they're just really in it for each other and like a really healthy relationship, you know, like he's not domineering of her and they listen to each other and you know, like they really try to do the right thing for other people. And then ultimately, like his whole fixing of things, I really thought about that a lot because he does a lot of it. He fixes the father's car. He gets like a carburetor and like rebuilds his motor while they're waiting. He fixes the plumbing in Conjuring 2. He plays guitar, like, and it's like their goodness.
That was over. I don't want to completely interrupt you, but the singing to the kids thing was actually the moment where I was like, I can't take this anymore.
Oh, it's so
and like,
funny.
I love these movies, but like he's not singing to the kids and like doing an Elvis impersonation. Like, just dial it back just a little.
Well, I think one of the funny things about like that song, because again, as per usual, super high when I watch this movie. The fact that it starts off really campy and silly, he's like clearly doing Elvis, and then about halfway through, he's earnestly singing.
Yeah,
I think really mirrors a lot of the film a little bit. Like there's overt camp in the film. Like, of course, this is hilarious. Things are knocking, things are coming out of whatever. But then the film shifts gears into pretty serious territory sometimes, but then goes back to being funhouse. And the movement between like the idea of theology and decency and then funhouse horror, I think is one of the big appeals of this film for me. Like it goes from being a thoughtful film about like how should you deal with other people? Like what does it mean to put yourself or put other people before yourself? You know, so that's going on in the film.
That's fair.
But it's also super silly. I mean,
right. You know, it's something you just said reminded me. Monique and I were discussing this afternoon, and she brought up the Addams Family and how what are the couple's name? God damn it,
Gomez and Morticia.
Yeah, how something that was really significant about that show is how much they were into each other. Like he was just so hot for her, and they're this married couple, and that it was, especially at the time, maybe almost subversive that you would have this married couple, this couple that have kids and this house and this life, and they're just like so hot for each other that that's even like how that's almost a ridiculous concept to introduce into any story at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
so what you're saying about Ed and Lorraine Warren, no, that's really interesting. Like where are our happily married hero couples in pop culture?
Yeah, I mean, because it seems like they're like the whole idea of like, divorce and, like a schlub husband. The whole like there's this whole thing about like husbands in film are often portrayed now as comic relief. Like they're inept, they're like kind of doughy, whatever. And you have Ed Warren in this film is a fucking go-getter. Like, he's a World War II vet. He's very capable. He has...
Well, we're living in a time where even Superman has this dark, tortured inner life in cinema, which is, I mean, Superman's one of my least favorite characters ever, but even I feel that is a terrible, terrible way to approach him as a character.
Yeah, Grant Morrison, who is probably my favorite comic book writer right now, he wrote a Superman called All-Star Superman, which is joyously psychedelic and light and just full of levity and fun and weirdness. And that is the proper tone for Superman. Like every time like Clark Kent is in the scene, he's like bumbling and knocking into people, but every time he knocks into somebody, he like will like send them across the street and then they don't get hit by a bus. Like there's all this like comedy and stuff like that. And I think that scene where they're like, he's singing, it has a bit of that to me. Like it's a very fun scene. It also just does the job of breaking up the film. Like it was like super gnarly. They have the crooked man character pops up.
Jack Skellington.
Oh, so stupid.
I mean, it looked good.
Oh, it's a great looking effect when it turns from the dog into the creature and stuff.
Which apparently was a lot of practical effect in that moment. Apparently that was the composer, Joseph Bishara, who is the composer of that film and a lot of horror films. I kind of love his soundtracks, and he's also often the villain or some sort of supernatural being in a lot of these horror films. And I think that was him as generally a practical effect, if I read correctly.
Yeah. That's the one of the real big problems I had with Conjuring 2 was how that scene is rolled out. It's like, that is a big bad. Like that's like a boss monster, and it's rolled out near the beginning of the film. And then the middle of the film introduces this really cool plot line about doubt and whether or not the little girl is faking it. And, there's the script does kind of an interesting job where the Warrens are vocalizing a lot of the skepticism. They're like, well, this could be this, or it just looks like they're jumping in the air, for these levitation pictures. It doesn't look real at all. And so as an audience member, you're kind of like, oh, maybe the Warrens are somewhat skeptical, and they make the decision to kind of leave. It seems like after like a funhouse monster has appeared and thrown everyone through walls, you can't go back from that. So it seems like I don't want to say a pacing mistake, but it is like in a nearly flawless film, it does seem a bit off.
Yeah.
I mean flawless in like as in a horror movie, like it's just a really well crafted, well put together series.
Right. No, totally. Continuing about Ed and Lorraine Warren and then jumping into what you were just talking about, one thing I found about them being portrayed so luminously is I almost felt it was a little bit like Reese's Pieces in E.T. Like it was just a little bit like not just, there are these good, noble characters. I also felt like I was being sold something. And I have a feeling that had something to do with them getting the rights from Lorraine or something, that these movies are only possible as properties if Ed and Lorraine are portrayed in a certain way, and I'm making assumptions, but I think it's a pretty fair assumption to make that if they were depicted even slightly more cynically, that it would be a no-go as a property for the filmmakers. And in terms of skepticism, I think that any time skepticism is raised in these films, it's so lowball. It's so easily like, because, okay, from where I'm sitting, Ed and Lorraine Warren are full of shit. Whether they know it or not is a secondary question. But there's an ocean of very accurate skepticism applied to their photography, their stories, blah, blah, blah. And that world is just so easily dismissed in these movies that feels very disingenuous in terms of the filmmakers. And then when they come off as the skeptics in Conjuring 2, I feel that it's actually a plot hole, because when they see the daughter actually wrecking the room, they're like, see, she's wrecking the room. We see through this charade. And it's like, well, wait, wouldn't you assume a demon was possessing her to wreck the room?
That's immediately what I was thinking. You know, then you have Run Lola Run comes in and goes like, I has the evidence. I'm shutting this down.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, like really? Because you guys have seen with your own eyes a bunch of crazy shit that just happened.
Can I say something mean?
Yeah.
That's the second time you've done a German accent, but done it as a French person.
I don't know. I can't help it. Like my only good accent is like a Russian accent. I'm pretty solid on the Russian accent. But the other ones.
Next
like,
time you do a German accent, make it Russian.
I'm only going to do
it might
Russian
be closer.
Are there any Russian horror movies that we could watch? That
There's one called Vi, V-I-Y, that's really good, but I think you have to bootleg it.
Yeah,
that's the only one. Stalker. It's not a horror film.
No. I think you just go watch videos of people doing crocodile. It's like
Russia's just horror, so they don't need. There doesn't need to be movies to point it out. Also, before we completely move on from my bitching about the Warrens, there's an interesting moment where they're giving a lecture and they have written on the blackboard infestation, oppression, possession. Like these are stages that a person will go through when possessed by a demon. And I think that we can also take infestation, oppression, possession as a process by which someone is completely shammed by another person. They're using it to describe what they're protecting the world from, but it could easily be applied to how they take advantage of people at their weakest points.
It also sounds like the game plan for these campus leftist groups too. Infest, oppress. What was the third one?
Possession.
Yeah, it's totally going on at Evergreen College right now. Like that's basically what happened there.
Let's get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
We were at the beginning of the episode talking about how there are all these movies, right, that are part of this world. And I think that it's fun to think of it in the wake of our episode about 10 Cloverfield Lane, when we had this big discussion about the extended universe.
Yeah, totally.
And these movies have an extended universe. And I think it also has to do with now in Hollywood, the only way you can crack the $100 bajillion mark in draw is that you create a property that's bigger than itself. It either has to rely on an earlier property, which this does because it's kind of using
everything,
history. But it's also, rather than just doing what horror movies have been doing for a long time, which is like The Conjuring, Conjuring 2, The Conjuring 3, The Conjuring 4. They're doing The Conjuring, Annabelle, The Conjuring 2. The Nun is coming up. There's going to be a Conjuring 3. And I think there's going to be another spinoff, maybe. If I'm
There's no way they're not going to do The Crooked Man if they do all this other shit. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I mean, that's not announced or anything like that, but it's just right there.
And I think it's also incredibly obvious because The Nun, despite the fact that this is a true story, The Nun was apparently introduced into the plot weeks before its premiere. Like, they crammed The Nun into that film as like a flash of inspiration by the filmmakers. They discuss it as if it was this great cinematic idea, but I think it was actually a great sales idea to set up The Nun as a character and a commodity that they could sell in the future, just like in the first Conjuring movie, you have to sit through all this Annabelle shit, which has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. They're just setting you up for, it's sort of like the end, ? But it's like at the beginning of the movie. What is this doll shit? Oh, this is a preview within the movie.
It's so Marvel that when I watch these movies, I sat through the credits expecting there to be an end credit scene.
Just like a post credits?
Yeah, like a post credits. Like I was like, oh, it's definitely going to come. I was like, and I have to know about this.
The Crooked Man's going to turn and look at us and...
or something like that. But you know, back to our 10 Cloverfield episode where we talked about Guy Ritchie and his film King Arthur that just came out. You know, like when we recorded 10 Cloverfield Lane, King Arthur had not come out yet, right? And I hadn't seen it yet. And he talked about how good fucking luck if your film isn't part of an established big franchise. And, you know, the movie wasn't great, but it wasn't the worst movie ever. And it just tanked the box office. And it seems like all these films, each one does better than the last one as the audience is more bought into the universe. It almost has a Days of Our Lives kind of feel to it. You know, like once you're invested a year, you're going to be in for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, or like Lost, or no, The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Like I've hated that show for years and I'm still watching it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't hate it until recently, and I don't watch it at all. Like,
I wish I was as strong as you.
I just have my hard line is a CGI tiger. Like in anything, like CGI big cats, it just turns me off. Like it was to me the big problem of, no, I can never remember the name of that fucking Will Smith movie.
I Am Legend?
Yeah, I Am Legend.
Yeah.
You know, the lion that eats the deer, it looks like shit. And it makes that movie, which could be like a really cool kind of like slow burn, like what's going on apocalypse movie, terrible. You know, it's just an awful thing.
There is a lot awful about that movie.
Did I ever tell you
and it's all CGI based.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you about my Life of Pi theory?
No.
Life of Pi is the prequel to The Hangover. It's where the tiger comes from in The Hangover.
That's really good.
Yeah, it's like so it's a magical tiger makes its way to Vegas. Yeah. After all, after all of its adventures at sea.
I am, however, not going to rewatch either of those movies
That's okay.
to parse it out.
You don't have to. I want to circle back on a part of the conversation we had earlier when we were talking about how Ed and Lorraine were portrayed, and concerns over how people were portrayed were live with a lot of people. Like the Perron family, I listened to a podcast where the older daughter is on it, and she talks about how when they found out that James Wan was making the film, they were very concerned. They were like, "This is the torture porn guy. Like, we do not."
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, and so.
Oh, I don't like. Yeah, at that year, I would not want him telling my life story.
Right. Because
no. You know what? I take that back. The opposite.
You do.
I just did a 180.
Yeah. But, he had just come off of Saw, which is insanely successful. And I think a successful movie. I think that the first Saw, even a few of the sequels, they do what they're supposed to do. And Saw was really interesting because it introduced novelty to this genre. Like, I think torture porn was kind of definitely happening. But, one of the things that horror fans critiqued The Conjuring for is there's this criticism from like a certain kind of horror fan was like what they really want to see is a novel way of someone dying. Yeah. So there's this whole, well, I didn't see anything new in The Conjuring. There's nothing new in The Conjuring.
No, nobody even dies actually.
Nobody dies. There's no blood. There's no sex. There's nothing. Yet it has an R rating, which is pretty interesting. Everyone associated with the film, of course, says, "Oh, it's R because it's so goddamn scary."
Because it's so real.
It's so real. But I wonder too, like if you went in and are like, because most people are fighting the R rating, right? Like that's like that. They don't want the R rating because it restricts the number of people that can see the film or whatever. But I wonder if they were like, "What do you think about giving this an R, huh?" And then they have that story,
right?
Yeah,
good point. So we often talk about collective dread, what's going on in the world contemporary to the films we discuss. And I wonder what your take on how this movie reflects contemporary concerns, how horror is iterated in this movie as a way of our culture dealing with something.
This is a very absolutist statement. And I know that's always opening up you're opening yourself up for trouble. But I don't think it addresses any modern concerns. And I think that's part of the fun of the film.
Yes.
Is it's the type of fear that you would have had as a kid in the early 80s.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking too, is that it's defined by it resolutely not addressing contemporary concerns. And although a lot of what it's about is in the air, like all these ghost hunting movies and the like, it's that our real fears right now are things like ISIS and our government falling apart and technocrats taking over our lives via our iPhones. I don't know, whatever. However, hey, this is cute. Back in the 70s, there used to be witches made you crazy, like
Yeah.
it's something we're not actually afraid of. And it just gives you a couple of jump scares and a bit of mythology to sink your teeth into. And so it's fun because it doesn't address anything you're actively concerned about unless you, I don't know, unless you're somebody, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine if you found anything particularly problematic in this, you spent way too much money on your degree. Like I just.
Well, I mean, sorry, I'm going to have to be that person. I mean, anybody who listens to this podcast and my other podcast, Why We Listen, knows I have issues with retromania running through, and this is exactly that. So this is sort of like how our member berries when they taste like fear.
Yeah. There is a slight difference though. Like, and I haven't really walked this out yet, but there's a little bit of a difference between what Stranger Things does in its retromania and what a film like this, which would be borderline a period piece. You know what I mean? Like
Borderline.
Well, I mean it is, right? But like it's the music, especially the pop music in it is really fun, and the clothes and anytime there's like a late 60s, early 70s, like look on screen. It's just so strong. And it's just, I think people just have, it's probably the same thing that happened in the 80s when people look back to the 50s and are like, oh my God, it was such a simpler time. Like you look back to the late 70s, and you're like, it was fucked up for sure, but in a way that we liked.
Yeah, I think it's similar to why Stand By Me was such a commercial success in the 80s, is the way it was about a certain kind of horror and fear that people weren't actually actively dealing with at the time.
Yeah, I think it also lets you like juice up a pretty standard plot. It gives it a little bit of a flavor. Like, to me, the best of the X-Men films is X-Men First Class. And I think mainly just because it takes place in the past and it's kind of interesting looking. So you get to see these modern effects in an older environment, and there's something kind of cool about that. I mean, one of the things I was really thinking about today was how basically every horror movie looks great now, like with digital filmmaking capabilities, and even monster design. I mean, if you really wanted to go find a cool monster, you could just go poke around on Pinterest, find something you thought was pretty cool, and kick the artist like $1,000 and probably have a pretty credible monster for pretty much anything, know. But the next level, the thing that I think an average filmmaker can't copy, it's very expensive to do a period set, right? So your movie, by setting it in the past, you're distancing it from modern horror with its modern look and its modern color treatment and, like creaky violin hipsterism and all of that shit.
Yeah. True. I think another thing you and I come back to, no, you know what? I think this is just something I harp on a lot with movies. A concern of mine with horror films is what excuses are built into the text when you watch something and you would normally have to make an apology for some aspect of it, but you give it a pass. And why do we give it a pass? I think that how that's built into this one is that even though it's based in fact or claims to be a true story, you can also excuse any aspect of it by saying that it's just a movie.
Right.
So it kind of gets to have its cake and eat it too. It gets to be a true story, but doesn't have to adhere to anything, because even people who believe absolutely everything about the Warrens would, I mean, possibly some of them are like, it's totally fake, but they all know it's just a movie and know to give things a pass, right?
Yeah. And then some of the imagery, though, is just so strong. Like in Conjuring 2, when it opens on the windows from the Amityville house, you know immediately what that is. Like those windows are just so iconic, like the two curved windows.
Yep.
And it's funny how like collective film memory can mingle a little bit with like collective fact memory. The memory of those windows are as real as the memory of Nixon resigning to me.
Right. Yeah, certainly. And actually, speaking of retro, another aspect of that I just remembered I noticed is what I kind of referred to as villainous trifling, when the villain, when the big bad in a horror seems to not just get straight to the point. Like if something's omnipotent or has boundless powers or whatever, why they just sort of fuck around for an hour and a half. So in these two movies, do these demons need to like build up their powers for a while? Like what's with the like, we're going to scare the kids who nobody's going to believe anyway. We want this family out of this house, so we're going to like move some furniture and scare the children who are imminently dismissible. Why not just either kill the mom or just set fire to the house immediately? Like what? Because it's based on a true story, it makes me want to apply certain rational aspects to even the demons. Like, okay, you're a demon, you want this family out. Is this how you would go about it? And I know that this is a tradition, of course, in horror movies, slasher films, that's what they're about. They're about inefficient, slow killing so that you can draw it out for an hour and a half, for 90 to 120 minutes. But I think that's another retro aspect to this film is villainous trifling is sort of not part of contemporary horror films, or if it's drawn out for a reason, like with torture porn. It's like, well, why is this taking so long? Because the main character is fucking with people or drawing out their pain or something like that. Whereas with a demonic possession, it's like, well, just pick up the kid and throw him against the wall and kill him. What's with the like, oh my God, I saw his reflection and then he's gone and now I'm scared and nobody believes me. That's not an efficient way to kill, take over, scare away.
Well, I mean, to me, that just sounds like another industry ripe for disruption. You know, like you're going to have some tech ghost company come in and just completely make it to where all you have to do is, you know, like tap an app on your phone, the chains will rattle for you, or you get some other poorer ghost to rattle the chains for you. But aside from that potentially lucrative industry, you know, some of what you're talking about is actually answered by the real people in the real cases. Like there's a recording of the little girl from the Enfield case and her voice that everybody's like, oh, it sounded like an old man. It is dog shit. It sounds like a little girl doing an old man's voice in a play. And then everybody's like, well, it would have damaged her vocal cords, and clearly she would have known. I watched two people die from smoking-related lung cancer, and I'll still smoke cigarettes from time to time. So clearly, like, a little kid doesn't give a fuck about her lungs being, or her vocal cords being damaged by imitating an old man. But anyway, they specifically ask her, they're like, why are you diddling around with all these kids instead of just getting right to it? And the little girl basically says, I get energy from the children because... And then they're like, well,
that's
you don't.
Cool.
Yeah, and they're like, you don't get energy from the adults. They're like, the children use less energy. Like, and it's this whole conversation, and the paranormal investigator asking the spirit through the little girl all these questions. It's just fucking absurd. I mean, the one thing that's really impressive about it is like the detail that the kid kind of walks through, but it's also like little kid shit. It sounds like something like that would be in Calvin and Hobbes. You know, if there was a haunting in that.
Right.
There's that, and then there's the whole idea of like ultimately the desire is to imperil the souls of the people involved. Like that's the sort of general theology of the whole thing. And you do that like by like turning people against each other. It's like sometimes in some stories, the demons don't actually have any real power over you. They can only do these small things. They can only do these like poltergeist tricks. Like they're not actually super strong, but what they can force you to do or like trick you into doing is what's strong. So I don't know, but these seem pretty high powered.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have another question. So Conjuring, The Conjuring 2, what's being conjured?
Yeah, that's a great question. Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move on.
Yeah.
Let's move on and talk about actually in the wake of Black Swan, those Starsky and Hutch posters. I so wanted the Starsky and Hutch posters in the girl's bedroom in C2 to like start screaming at her like the mother's paintings in Black Swan.
Yeah.
That would have been fucking terrifying to watch 70s movie stars come to life on a little girl's wall.
Yeah. It's interesting though. I think a different filmmaker would have, like James Wan seems to deploy the camera a little bit trickily. Like he'll leave you clues and you're like waiting for a thing to happen and it doesn't. Like the camera does linger on those posters a little bit for a while. And you're like, and especially after watching Black Swan, I was like, oh, right, these things are going to start screaming at them or something like that.
Right.
But it doesn't.
Although the bed sheet getting ripped off the little girl was a sort of like, it was so obvious that I didn't expect it to happen, and it happened. Yeah. Which I don't know if is to his credit for being unimaginative or to his credit for doing something that was so obvious that I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting how like he sets up the tension for these jump scares. It's hard to even call them jump scares. I mean, they certainly are, but where one film the music might rise, and his film, the music disappears, and it's quiet all of a sudden. So there's all these. He's using the same formula, but like a mirrored version of other horror movies. And for instance, a lot of horror movies use really tight shots to elicit like emotion and fear. And a lot of his shots are these kind of like wide lens shots of an entire room. Again, you get to see like a real strong sense of place in this film. Like you're oriented in the house, and then shadow and light is where the terror and fear come from. Things coming out or whatever. What you said about the nun, Valak, I guess is the name, give us some power over this creature. It's interesting to me that was a lately deployed idea because it's such a fun looking element in the film. And then did you see the interview where they have like some German comedian or something like that dressed up as the nun interviewing the cast?
No.
It is awesome because
that sounds good.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. And it has given this film its Freddy Krueger. Although it does have like 3 Freddy Kruegers. It's got the old man. I mean,
which is very Marvel franchise. Yeah. Of like, wait, who's the villain in this movie? Because an hour ago I was sitting in this chair and the main character was fighting someone else.
Yeah. I wonder, like, in the way that there was the hero's journey forever, as soon as, I mean, of course, going back thousands of years, but it seems like people really wrote to the hero's journey after Carl Jung popularized it. I wonder if this whole Marvelization of film, that we're seeing it trickle out, like the style of setting up multiple elements of a franchise and multiple bad guys in a film.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting.
I mean, I could see like the way the Marvel comic universe has TV shows. I could see like, the Chinese dude from Conjuring 1 has his own show, like after he split off from Ed and Lorraine.
Totally.
So there's like a
TV
TV
if the
show.
nun gets her own movie, why can't that guy get his own TV show?
Yeah.
Sure. As a real life, based on a true story.
Yeah. Getting more into like the film mechanics itself, something I appreciated about this film is its use of, other than Vera Farmiga, who I think is absolutely gorgeous, goofy looking actors. Like all the kids are kind of odd looking. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of types of male pattern baldness that you don't see often these days. Like just, either people like shave their heads like yourself and look like sexy Jason Statham.
Thank you.
Or you do something. You have an intervention of some sort. Or you just let your shit go like me. But yeah, like a lot of the actors they're the type of character actor faces that you would see in 70s films. Like the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, every fucking person down to the dude who pumps your gas is hot, right. And it sort of takes you out of the film a little bit. And I think this, especially Conjuring 2, where they have some English teeth on display.
Yes.
It really gives it a little bit of legitimacy that I think a lot of horror fans are also fans of 70s cinema.
Sure. Like
kind of the Tarantino stuff. And I think it's just another really intelligent choice from James Wan.
Yeah. James Wan is definitely a really smart filmmaker. And I'm a very embarrassed fan of Furious 7. Mm-hmm. I think that film is just so... There's nothing like that movie. None of the other films come close to it. I'm not saying it's the best of the franchise, but holy shit.
I mean, the way the guy just orchestrates movement on film, mm-hmm. I mean, or on screen is really really impressive. Like you feel pulled and pushed, and it's almost like the visual experience, a visual version of the experience you get listening to a Pixies song. You know, like the dynamism of the music is so interesting. It just pulls you to like high and low.
Yeah.
What did you think of Lily Tomlin and The Conjuring 1?
Lily Tomlin?
Wait, no, Lily Tomlin. What's her name? No, not Lily
Lily
Tomlin.
Taylor.
Lily Taylor, fuck.
Oh my God.
It would be awesome if Lily Tomlin was
It
in this.
really would.
Yeah.
I love Lily Tomlin.
Yeah, I think like the acting in Conjuring really sells this film.
No, absolutely.
It's like she is so interesting to look at.
Lily Taylor's rad.
Yeah.
And she's another one, like watching and listening to interviews with her about this film. She's like super fascinating to listen to, discuss her process and how she works. Yeah, I love her. I think she's one of my favorites for sure. And she's been around a long time. She's like good at this because she's been working hard, you know.
Yeah. Is there anything in either the first or second film you think is just like a big fail? Like something that you didn't like?
To me, it is the Annabelle thing. And, you know, part of me kind of does like the meta-universe thing of like, we're going to put Annabelle and the Nun in these two films to spin them both off. Like, I can kind of respect that. But I felt that the Annabelle doll was really shoehorned. And I don't need everything to fit. It's not like that I need all the puzzle pieces to fit together perfectly in a film.
Yeah.
But it did feel kind of forced.
Yeah. I mean, James Wan's Twitter handle is creepy doll, you know, like, so.
Oh yeah. Well, all of his horror films seem to have like, is this true? Like a child's toy in it somehow, you know?
Yeah. I don't know. Something I always love in films is when there's things that like show you that you're just seeing a tiny sliver of the rest of the world. Like you wonder how deep it could be. And one of those
You're talking
things,
about the Warrens Museum of...
Yeah, like they go put something on the shelf and there's like 40 other creepy objects.
Sure.
And it really has...
It's like the basement of Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, or the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh,
you know, it just
totally.
You're just like, okay, what truly fucking horrible shit is in here that you're not even thinking about?
Absolutely.
It's
slightly Lovecraftian.
Oh,
the
totally
horrors are
Lovecraftian.
Legion or something.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And also the idea that they leave behind like an object, like there's a thing associated with each type of horror, you know?
Yeah.
If there was an object associated with your particular brand of horror, what do you think it would be?
Like a distortion pedal or something.
Like a haunted distortion.
The haunted Big Muff Russian distortion pedal.
Oh, nice. Do you prefer the Russian Big Muff to the American one?
I don't care because I mostly plug synths into my pedals. So
the analogness is not a deal.
Well, the way you get guitar tone is such a very specific magic alchemy. But when you sculpt sound with a synth, there's so much you're doing with the synth itself that the delicacies of how distortion pedals are architectured becomes a little bit less precious.
We just lost everybody except for like two super
Welcome
guitar
back.
Yeah, sorry. Like a discussion of Russian guitar pedals.
I am not editing that part out.
I don't think you should. It adds depth. It expands the world of our podcast.
However, I will say that anecdotally, Mr. S Leather and Fetters, which is like a really huge fetish shop in San Francisco that's been around for a very long time, they, for the last couple of years, have had a mannequin head that they've demoed, like blindfolds and gags and, you know, hoods and things like that on, that looks exactly like me. Like it's freakish. It's
Is it
like
haunted?
Well, here's the thing. So my friend works there. And he was like, we got to buy some more mannequins and shit. Do you want me to buy you one? And I was like, you have no idea. Please. I will pay anything to have one of those. And I have it. And it's like, it's pretty, well, first of all, it means that there's a factory in China, which is where it's from, of maybe hundreds or thousands of that head that would be rad to visit. I don't think it's worth the price of a trip to China to see, but I don't think I want to see the conditions that the people who make my head
What if you
Are
went
working
over
with
there and it was like in Return of the Jedi, like where they just worship you and like you, they like carry you around like a bunch of Ewoks.
But I think if there would be a haunted object in my life, it would be kind of like, it's like so obvious that it would have to be that somehow that mannequin head was
mannequin head.
hurt. What about you?
Man, that's a tough one. I don't know that there's anything that really identifies me as a person that's a thing. I mean, I'm sure there's something, maybe like a haunted Vitamix.
I just got one in the mail yesterday.
It's the fucking best. Like people out there, if you don't have a Vitamix, like you may think, why do I need a $400 blender? But you will use it twice a day, every day for the rest of your life, and it will last.
And those pounds just melt away.
Yeah. See, we brought up Jack LaLanne earlier. Now we're talking about Vitamix blenders. I wonder if we could get some sort of evil smoothie as our sponsor one day.
The stuff was an evil smoothie.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Been done.
That movie is such a fucking weird movie. I mean, it's because it's basically about yogurt.
Yeah,
right?
haunted yogurt or evil yogurt.
Yeah.
That's a great movie.
It seems like in the 80s, the fears that were addressed by horror were more explicit and tongue-in-cheek in a weird sort of way. Like, the stuff is basically about yuppie culture, right? Like, yogurt was a symbol for yuppie culture.
Whereas the irony and tongue-in-cheekness of Sharknado is not a critique of neoliberalism or something like that.
It seems like a nihilistic fart into culture. You know, like it doesn't. It like we talked about this in a few episodes. I think about how the actual things that people are actually afraid of, people don't seem to have the will to talk about them.
Right.
You know, like it or maybe they're just too scary or you know, or too political or whatever. Like, you know, people are so divided right now. I think now if there was a haunting, like an explicitly provable haunting, you would have people like on the Young Turks talking about like how the creature shouldn't have had the exorcism. You know, like you're like violating the rights of these fucking demons or something like that. like people are just so ready to like cuck themselves, like even in the face of like
paranormal intersectionality.
Yeah.
Oh, that's actually beautiful.
But you know what's kind of interesting in these films is there is a bit of paranormal intersectionality because the Amityville itself is a perfect example. Like, why is the Amityville house haunted? It was built on an Indian burial ground. Like that's one of the theories, but that's kind of been disproven. But then it's like
same with Poltergeist.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's based on this, you know. And then in Amityville, you know, the murder that kicks off the whole thing is the guy that owned the house, or the brother, I guess, goes through and shoots like 6 people. You know, it opens up like, you know, there's like some like criminal justice things kind of like brought up with Amityville. Like the way the justice systems work is he gets 6 life sentences for killing 6 people, and not his defense, but later on he's like, the devil made me do it. Yep. And his lawyer is actually tied up into the Amityville story a little bit because he thought that if he could get the news onto Amityville and gain some credence that this was a haunted house and he did something in a haunted house, then it would allow them to reopen the case. And then he could be tried differently or tried criminally insane or driven insane by this thing. Like
in parallel, this would be kind of like if Hostess started selling Twinkies. You can get away with murder if you eat Twinkies. Like this gives you superpowers to evade conviction in American courts.
Yeah. Or like haunted affluenza, like something like that, like some sort of thing. Like I can get out of crimes because I live in a traditionally haunted home.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you ever grow up around people who thought they had haunted houses? Or were you around anything like that?
Oh, I know people who think they live in haunted houses. Absolutely. And I did grow up around it. Nothing too explicit, but I think that I've always had people around who believe they had powers, believe they had witnessed paranormal events and things like that. And I think that's partly the reason why I have a relationship to skepticism that I do, which is like I'm incredibly skeptical, except I'm not saying I know. I don't know anything, but sometimes bullshit is hella obvious, right? And provability is not that high a hurdle to cross in the world, you know? And when something has decades to prove itself and continuously fails, there's just no cold fusion. There just isn't. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny too, to me, how there will be like cultural trends in bullshit, you know, like, cause it's not so hard to think about your modern Instagram yogi selling crystals and goji berry powder is not too far removed from Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Sure.
You know, it's basically the same universe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And the Maharishi Mahesh. Oh, Jesus. Did I just mar his name? You know what? I don't care. Fuck that guy.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. The Maharishi effect. If you get like 4% of the people meditating or whatever.
But backing up, something you were saying about horror confronting genuine contemporary concerns. I think I soft said this before, but I have like a hope/belief that that may change any day. That there is some sort of breakthrough in the realm of horror and cinema, or maybe television. I don't know. Probably most likely cinema. Someone will come around and make a film that is what we are genuinely terrified about now, in the political reality we're in now, that isn't just some sort of like, yeah, someone's going to stick it to Trump. I'm not talking about something that obvious. I mean, like the way in which we're terrified of, like it would be like Red Dawn, but not campy and stupid, you know? Like the idea of teenagers fighting off the Red Menace is totally preposterous in the way that it was framed in the Red Dawn movies. But the reality of the degree to which radical Islam is in the news is pretty relentless. Like this shit is just continuously happening and it's real and it's fucking terrifying. But as you pointed out, that's not really addressed in our horror films, despite the fact that that is a very real horror that we're confronted with on a regular basis. And I wonder if someone's going to come along and tackle that so hard that it might change everything, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how like films have sort of tiptoed around it a little. I mean, the only film I can even think of that's even touched it a little bit is Delivers from Evil, that Eric Bana film where he's like a cop, and it's also an exorcism film. And where the evil spirit comes from is the Middle East. Like some soldiers go over there, some IED has blown up in a hole in the ground, and there you go down, and there's like a cult or a temple or something like that. But
and they bring it home like malaria or something?
Yeah, they basically bring it home like a disease. I could see a revival of interest in the disease genre of horror films. I could see that coming back. I mean, you're always just one bad day away from some sort of disease outbreak or something like that.
That's true. I mean, even though a movie like Outbreak wasn't that great, it's really discomforting. It's really pretty upsetting.
Yeah. I can't remember what I saw the other day. I saw a film. It was like a horror film, and it was based on a true condition. Like basically, like so, I was like, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." Like the disease that it's at the heart of this film is driving it. But yeah, I'm reading this book right now, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I guess is a pretty popular book.
Yeah, I've always wanted to read it. How is it so far?
Man, it is long as shit. It's 800 pages long, and it's a great book. But one of the things that's interesting in the book is that it starts off where all magicians are theoretical magicians. No one is actually practicing magic. So they're just talking about magic and thinking about magic. And I feel like that's kind of where we are with horror. And we're a part of that, right? Like there's probably more conversation about horror happening right now than there is the development of new horror. And then a lot of people are just doing, and in this book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, there's this idea of a type of traditional magic that should be practiced. So when these two magicians who are practical magicians are introduced into the story, they start off just kind of doing parlor shit that would be very proper in English, but they cross over into dangerous territory at a certain point, and then that's when like the real magic happens. And I think we're really ready for it. I think you're right. I think it's probably going to be pretty soon. I bet in the next 3 years we get like a radically inventive horror film that is paradigm shifting for the genre.
Yeah.
I mean,
Listeners, make it happen because I'm not going to.
yeah, hire me to do it. Free me from the true horror of my office life.
Do we have anything else?
I guess, for me in my own history with the supernatural and things like that is like I've always wanted to see something.
Have you ever seen anything?
Never.
Oh,
I've
really?
never even seen anything close. And I grew up in a family that was they weren't church going, but very like my grandmother was very religious. My mom is religious in her own way, but they would also go to psychics and shit in the South. So I've been and seen like a whole bunch of shit that was supposed to be really dark in the South. Like I've been to like innumerable haunted houses or seen cursed objects and all this stuff. And I've never seen anything even close. And I always wanted to, because it's like, man, it would be great to have that affirmed, because you can just be like, great, go to church on Sundays, won't do anything. It's sort of like the evidence of the negativity proves the positivity, and that seems like a pretty good, strong position to be in. But I've never seen anything like that, not even anything close.
Can we talk about drugs?
Can we? Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
have you? Do you mind?
I was so taken aback by that question.
It's one thing to talk about weed, but like, have you done much psychedelics?
Of course.
Have they introduced you to any realizations, or have you been so deep into them that they revealed something to you in a way that you couldn't just explain? Like, yep, that was some crazy shit, and then you just get on with your day.
Not once. I mean, and I'm like, before I ever even touched a substance, I was deeply immersed in all the entheogenic stuff. Like I was very familiar with the promises of psychedelics before I ever even started, and was completely bought into it. Like for me, I was ready to have my mind completely expanded by these substances. And I found that they certainly were strong and they certainly do things, but there was nothing improved in my own mindset by them. I mean, I would try to write on them or after them. And, I talked to my wife about this quite a bit, which is that the thing that works for me and has always worked for me is hardcore sobriety and work. Yeah. And everything else is bullshit. Like I've only ever found out things about myself by doing very hard things, not taking hard things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of what you've just said about yourself and your history, I'm actually on the opposite end. Well, not the opposite quite, but like I've seen a lot of weird shit. I have a lot of friends that have like very earnestly seen a lot of weird shit. I've done psychedelics and experienced things that I can't just say, boy, chemistry was sir jumbled up on my head. I have Christian Science in my family and witnessed and had family members go through things that are hard to just sort of dismiss. So I feel like I just have like a toe just sort of dipped into the paranormal and the unexplainable as being something that I can't dismiss easily based on personal experience. Yeah.
And part of it, like,
but I've never been chased out of a house or something.
No, I've never even heard an unexplained knock. It's one of the things, before I get into my discussion about like how like faith kind of relates to this. One thing you see over and over in these films, they're like, well, if I heard that thing, I wouldn't go in that room. What wouldn't you do? Like, I mean, I was thinking about that at my house. If I hear a bump downstairs, I need to go make sure I can kill it. Like, and I think because it's probably a person, it needs to be stopped. But back to the supernatural thing, like what I do experience from time to time is a feeling of reverence, like around specifically like Catholic things. And of course that's the tradition I grew up in, right? So you're going to have like a natural disposition unless something happened to you to force you out of it. But when I do go into a church, I often have a very pronounced feeling of peace, or like like borderline religious experience, which is never tied to anything supernatural, but to have like an experience like that in a church would be sort of a violation of the theology anyway. Like that's one of the things about Lorraine Warren that's kind of weird is like they're devout Roman Catholics, but everything that makes her special is forbidden.
Yes. That's super fascinating about her, is that she struggled with her faith her entire life because her lived experience of her own Catholicism was contrary to what she was being told was the true faith.
Yeah, and one of the things that's so peculiar is that she grows up being told that like either she's imagining what she's experiencing, and as far as her mediumship, the way she describes her mediumship, I think that some people may just be more attuned to, I don't want to say like auras, but like whatever the experience of that is. Like,
Sure.
like
People can be empathetic in a profound way. And again, whether there is such a thing as being an empath or anything is secondary to this. But yeah, some people can cold read really well, like so well that it's almost better therapy than seeing a shrink.
I'm actually pretty good at it, like cold reading. Like, I when I was like really into tarot cards, I got actually really pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And I'm really good at telling if people are lying or not. Like to the point where I feel like I should have been an FBI agent. Like I'm very good at it. So I have that. So I don't doubt that she has some sort of like higher level ability. Like, did you read the story about the guy that just climbed Mount Cap or El Cap in Yosemite? No ropes, nothing, just fucking bare hands all the way up. It's an all-time probably historical feat of athleticism that is, I mean, I'm sure somebody else will do it, but a bunch of people will die trying to do it. It's so intense. But they did an fMRI on that guy just to see like, oh, is there something different? His amygdala is slightly different, so it's smaller. So the thing that creates fear in your brain and hesitation is not as powerful in him. So maybe she has an enlarged part of her brain or something that allows her to have these experiences. But it's funny, like the modern church that she grew up in was basically like, this is either from the devil or you're making it up. Either way, it's against your religion to fuck with it. But the entire lives of the saints are full of mystical experiences.
Yep.
Like especially the desert mystics in the 3rd century. Those guys were flying around and experiencing visions and things like that. So, and then Catholicism, unlike other religions, doesn't really have a date where they're like, it doesn't happen anymore. In some branches of Christianity, there's this idea that like after the crucifixion, that was it. There's no more, that was the last supernatural occurrence.
That's a bone that like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris both pick often with the history of Christianity is like, God used to talk to people all the time. So ran out of things to say. What's up?
Yeah. And then, like I've had those conversations in religion classes in high school and they would say, well, the Bible kind of says it all. So you got the court notes. Like you don't need to, I don't know. If you could see the evidence of a supernatural event that would prove the existence of a world religion, what would you want to see, and which world religion would you want to see proved?
Oh, well, is this the real world that I wish we lived in, or is it a movie world? Because like Scientology, like I would want it to be Scientology. Like I would want to witness intergalactic, blah blah blah. Like that would be amazing.
Oh, I think that counts.
If a rival came to be real with the Dianetics mythology, that would be super badass. But
man, I didn't even think about that. What a great answer,
right?
Yeah.
But thank you. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think if it was some sort of a genuine thing, it would be probably just some like hippie nonsense that doesn't end with everybody committing suicide because of a comet. Just some sort of and peace and love fell upon the earth type of. It's probably a religion that may or may not exist that I just made up in my head.
Some sort of like matriarchal sex religion.
They have those?
Probably.
Sweet.
Viking shit for me, for sure. Like,
so not peace and love, just violence and then violence.
I mean, if you knew that you could go to heaven by smashing your enemies until they killed you, what's better than that? I
think that's the problem. I think we have that belief running through terrorist cells all through Western culture. That's pretty much what you just backed up.
I think I get it now.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah. Please don't take any wooden nickels or perform any unnecessary exorcisms out there. If you feel you're in the need to conjure up some good karma by rating us 5 stars on iTunes. There's nothing to buy from Amazon. I was going to say Amazon, but you could buy yourself something cool like a scary movie.
That's a great idea. You should also join our mailing list. Come to scarythoughts.org and sign up.
The .org proves that we're serious.
Totally. And please join us next time, which is natural because you're a subscriber and it's just going to float right into your iPhone or Windows device.
Much like an apparition haunting your home.
It really is the same.
Yeah.
We're doing The Babadook from 2014, and Andrew Sheets, a.k.a. Meredith, will be our guest. I'm Mark Kate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
Thanks for listening.
Party on.